Welcome to Sevedge Sessions, episode number
7.
Is it actually 7?
I think we're at 7 or 8.
You know, it's really interesting. I had a lot of people actually start commenting. They're like actually asking for like the feed to this. Someone asked for an RSS feed.
Really?
I thought it was pretty interesting.
That's
like,
awesome.
The students are actually taking like a really helpful feedback. So today we have with us, for those who are on camera, we have a 2-camera setup. You'll be able to see Peter, CTO of Devslopes, is here with us. 16 years of professional development, nearly 20 years of professional development.
I'd say around 16 years.
And the beautiful accent is because he's from South Africa. Do you want this?
I'm from Botswana.
Botswana. Okay, Botswana, South, same thing. Do you want this tea?
No, thank you.
Can you hand it to Bruce over there?
Thank you. The tea is part of... Oh, no, Peter.
Did that hurt?
No.
So he just spilt piping hot tea on himself. He doesn't feel pain. I can't get that on that white couch. Fuck.
I'll take care of it.
I'll just drink all the tea. No, you're good. So what I wanted today's episode to be about, usually, you know, we're going into trauma or any of these other things, right? And I think this is a really cool pivoting point. We can still go down that route, but we've had how many students in the program want to talk about AI and it's taking people's jobs?
Literally almost every day.
Almost every single day. So it's interesting, right? So I want to open up our Discord because it seems like what's happening right here is kind of a misunderstanding. Now, I want to give context because Peter's really smart and he understands what's called the Dunning-Kruger effect. So when you have no experience, typically you're going to have the loudest opinions. Hence, a lot of our students, don't take this bad, guys. Okay, this is just the reality. When you don't have experience in something, typically you're going to have the boldest opinions because you really don't know that much about it just yet. Now, when you get very good at it, hence Peter's level, he's going to say here in a bit, I'm not that good. Yeah, he really is.
Really fucking good.
Yeah. So that's how you know you're dealing with somebody smart. But his specialty is not in AI. So we're going to try what we can to get out your opinions and thoughts on it. Where he refuses to give impact on his neural networks. So we're especially going to talk about neural networks. So I want to start off with, first and foremost, it seems like one of the biggest questions people are coming up. We were talking about this yesterday. What is the difference between machine learning and AI? Because it seems like people don't really know the difference.
Machine learning is a subset of AI.
Okay, so it's under the category of AI.
Yeah. So a neural net is a form of AI, just as a classifier is a form of AI.
Classifier.
So you have several thousand pictures of plants. You give it a picture of a dog. Is this a plant? No, it's a plant.
And that's what follows essentially reinforced learning, right?
Yes.
So that's what, is that the right term to use for it?
There's a number of terms, supervised, unsupervised.
Supervised and unsupervised. Isn't that the most popular?
It depends on the application. Really.
Got it. So it's funny, we were talking about this yesterday a little bit. I think one of the coolest examples is looking at the experience of what happened with Dota. It was Dota, right?
Yes.
So for those that don't understand, what happened is Elon founded OpenAI, didn't he?
No, that was Sam Altman.
What did Elon had something? I think Elon co-founded OpenAI. I'm pretty confident. So. Can you Google that, West? Did Elon co-found OpenAI?
I mean, there's a couple companies like AlphaGo is another one. There's a really good documentary. I think it's just called AlphaGo, but Go is, I don't know if you guys have heard of that game.
The game Go. It's like chess, but more
it's like chess, but a lot more complicated, and really just because the number of permutations of moves you have is significantly more than chess. So you can't really build traditional logic around trying to figure that out. And there was a pretty big benchmark where I can't remember, AlphaGo's team beat the best Go player in the world. It was something like 4 or 5 matches to 1.
Jesus.
Wow.
Yeah, absolutely dominated him.
And what was the training time for it?
I don't know.
He didn't? Which one did he help co-found?
The AI company?
Yeah. There's a co-founder. So going back to the story of Dota, right? So this company created a bot that could play Dota. And I believe the only reinforcement it had was if it won or not. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah. So there's metrics. Like if you look at Dota, there's gold and a bunch of other things that the game's probably pulling from or the neural net is probably learning from.
So there's ways to say you're doing good or not, essentially.
Yes.
So they're keeping track of a skill level.
Yes.
So they had how many servers running the game at once?
Oh, a lot.
Hundreds of thousands, about millions, right?
I'm not a lot. I don't know the number.
So it's really interesting, right? So it's funny because we look about AI We think, man, this is something completely artificial. When in reality, it's just looking at essentially evolution. It's evolution playing on itself over and over and over again.
So they'll have a bunch of models that compete and they train and they learn, and they'll take the most successful of those models, and then they'll branch out and have a lot more of those models and then play, and then those will evolve, and they'll take the most successful of those. And
yeah, it's interesting. I remember seeing when they talked about it the first time, they said that the first like several thousand games, all it did was sit there.
Yep.
And it had control moves, but it just didn't do anything. It just sat there, got executed. And they said after a while, it just would hold the down button, and it just went to the bottom of the map and just like sat there. Then it controlled and played around the outside of the map. And then eventually it learned that, oh, if I hit somebody, that's good.
Yep.
Like I get points.
it's similar how we learn. It's just that they're able to really scale that. So they could have several thousand years of playtime in days, weeks, months.
And it's interesting. So I'm sure someone sits there and like, how the fuck did they get a video game to be better than the most competitive people out there? And it's like, well, it's millions upon millions of games, essentially, what evolution was built upon.
Yeah, so what's really interesting about when neural nets play games or do tasks like that, they don't really have... How you learn, you would watch somebody play Dota, you would replicate them, and then
100%.
you would essentially build off of what you learn from them.
Yep.
But the neural net's coming in with no knowledge of how this is meant to be played. So there's no predisposed notions of what to do or how to do it. So it's able to come up with really novel strategies or game-breaking...
Just purely unique things.
Yep.
So it's funny. I remember them saying they trained it for like 6 months, I think, and that's when they did the first 1v1. And they did it, that person versus, like, I think the guy was maybe in the top 20 in the world, something like that. And they ended up getting slaughtered. The guy was beat. And he was like, what the fuck? And then they waited, I think, another 6 months to a year. And they took Dota, 4 Dota AIs, in a team environment. And then they put that against the 4 or 5 best team members. I don't know what the team setup is in Dota. And the Dota team... Like it was 4 different AI setups, not just one. It was 4 different ones that had to communicate together. And they said that the strategies it was implementing was completely novel. Like no one's ever done it. And they were really confused. They're like, what the fuck are they doing right now?
So a lot of professional gamers are taking from these strategies, because they've also done this with StarCraft as well. And they have learned what things that they thought were important in the game is not as important as they thought they were.
Interesting.
Has there ever been an example of a human beating one of these AIs?
Yeah.
But like one of these things that just rampages through everyone?
So yeah, of course. So the AlphaGo one is a great example of that. I mean, don't get me wrong, it crushed him. But as it's getting there, I think they started with the 5th or the 6th best player in the world. They invited them to their offices, played them. It just got better. The more training time, the more time it gets to practice, the better it gets.
Fuck.
It seems like the caveat to this is you beat it, but it learned from that mistake. And it's like, all right, game on. Like next time I come at you, I'm going to be substantially better.
Yeah.
And then it's like you can beat it until you can't beat it. It's
yeah.
inevitable.
Yeah, they're going to be better in applications like this, especially games. They're going to be better than we are.
So let's continue this, right? So we then can change the conversation to ChatGPT, and it's interesting because you sat there yesterday and you're like, Nathan, I don't know a lot about this, and I was like, what do you mean? You learn about machine learning? What's the difference? And he was like, actually, do you want to describe the difference here?
So I don't have a solid understanding of neural networks.
But the difference between it doesn't function with reinforced learning, or kind of to an
It can.
extent, in a
So
sense.
it absolutely can. There's lots of different types of neural networks. I guess I'm not really sure of what you're trying to get at.
So the conversation we had yesterday is, so I'm going to read a post from somebody that I heard on Facebook, because, there's a lot of people that are walking around right now saying, ChatGPT is going to replace everybody.
I mean, it's going to affect people's jobs at some point. This is inevitable. But just kind of like the same as with every other movement, like when automation came to factories, those people found new jobs and there was more jobs available. It's not the doom for everybody. I wouldn't see it like that.
So I'm pulling this up right now. Give me just a moment. Forgot the dude's name off the top of my head. Sorry.
Dun, 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 dun.
Hey, where's it at? Top comments.
Dun, 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 dun.
So, in essence, he was saying that everybody at blue collar is going to be replaced immediately. And you had a really interesting quote. You're like, that's actually not going to happen.
So I don't think that's going to happen. And more importantly than what I think, Sam Altman, the founder of OpenAI, doesn't think that's going to happen.
What did he specifically say?
It's proven already, or part of this is proven already. It's coming for creatives first, then white collar, and then blue collar jobs, really, is the order of progression.
Fuck. Yeah, you're gone, Bruce.
Oh, no.
Yeah, so creatives, I mean, it's no secret that it made the, or at least in tech news, AI has been winning art awards. Like, yep.
So looks like I'm going to have an issue getting this
blue collar work is actually more safe than we thought. If you look at several years ago, everyone was like, oh, truck drivers are doomed, all these factory workers are doomed. It turns out robotics is hard. I mean, according to Sam Altman, robotics is the hard part. And kind of melding those two is difficult. So
what
to be the trend.
What exactly is this going to automate? I just know it's like a bunch of tech. Like you could have this thing like write essays for you in theory.
You could have it write essays for you. You could have it do analysis on data to a degree. That's not to say you don't need actual human input. Like all ChatGPT or this type of AI is it understands patterns and it's able to give an output based on that pattern. A lot of what we need is still human creativity to interpret this and ask the right questions and really convert that into like our world.
Yeah.
Right, because we have stuff like Grammarly that's like AI designed to fix like spelling and stuff like
Actually,
that.
great point. Is something like Grammarly AI or?
I don't know how they've built it.
Gotcha. So it's funny. We hear all these people who sit around, right? Especially people who are new to coding. And I feel like there's something to learn about how you're communicating right now, right? In a sense of professionalism. You are saying, I can't comment on that. I don't know how it's built, right? Where does that come from? So I'm sure most people are like, oh yeah, it's just AI.
I guess it's just comfort in me being comfortable with what I don't know. I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Is it because you understand just how complex those things actually are?
I mean, that's part of it, yeah. I wouldn't necessarily want to assume how somebody's built it. I don't necessarily know, and I'm comfortable with saying I don't know how.
So if I ask, like, I actually think this is really interesting, and it's like the entire purpose of the podcast, for example, was to give people a chance to understand a deeper look inside my mind, how it functions, how it works. And I think that a chance for us to understand you is, like, for example, when people ask me, a great example is like, hey, how can I improve our marketing? My first thought would be guys, I have no idea. How am I supposed to help you? And so I say that initially, but the reason why that comes from is there's a little like program that runs in my head. Okay, I would need to know, what are you running on paid traffic on Instagram and Facebook? What does your paid traffic look like on YouTube? What does your paid traffic look like on TikTok? What is your organic marketing? I know that there's massive subsets to where my knowledge has told me I need to know all this information before I can give an opinion, right? So in your mind, when I ask something like, hey, is ChatGPT going to steal my job? When you say, dude, I don't know. I don't understand how neural networks work. Where does that come from? Like, where does your mind go to in terms of why this doesn't make sense or why you don't want to give an opinion?
Why I don't want to give an opinion? I guess it's because I don't really know what the future holds. I'm not an expert in the field. I don't know where it's going and how quickly.
I wanted to go on that more. So you said, I'm not an expert in the field. Tell me what you know about the field that makes it kind of so complex. Like, is there multiple breaks? Like, neural networks seems like it's a very broad spectrum.
So I have a very shallow understanding of how it works. I've worked adjacent to the field. I've worked with neural networks before, but it doesn't even necessarily mean I've worked on this type of neural network.
I see.
They're all built differently. They all have their strengths and weaknesses. It's a very, very concentrated field, just like anything in computer science. You really have to pick a specialty and dig deep into that to have a good understanding. I feel like I'm hesitant just because I don't know what the future holds. I haven't really looked into real AI in years, probably 4 or 5 years, and I know it's come so far. I mean, it's obvious, like ChatGPT, like what the people at OpenAI and AlphaGo and all these companies, like not AlphaGo, DeepMind, I think.
Yeah.
Like it's all, they've all progressed so far in the last 5 years. This is like probably one of the fastest moving fields in computer science.
The reason why I think it's relevant is people can learn a lot from the way you're behaving right now. Right? I think that's the biggest factor. Like, people need to learn how to behave like a successful developer. Successful developers aren't just going to abnormally go out and start giving opinions on shit they don't understand. It's very similar to lawyers. So I was on my mentorship call yesterday, and my mentor, Pat, he said, he was speaking to a lawyer. He's like, "Are you a good attorney?" And the attorney was like, "It doesn't compute. I don't understand what you're asking." He's like, "Dude, give me a fucking answer." He's like, "Are you a good attorney?" He said, "Well, if you were asking if I am a good personal workers' compensation attorney in Atlanta, I'm really fucking great then." And it's like, oh my God. Okay, you had to do that. Like, you went that subset. But that's how you know he's great at what he does. Like, attorneys are trained to be thinking that way. And it seems like coders, actually, he's going to be very upset that I said that. What term do you want me to use?
You can use any term you want.
I
don't like the
term
term
coders
professionally. Software engineer.
Why do you want software engineer?
Because I take what I've spent the last decade and a half of my life doing seriously. I prefer to use the real term of what I think it is. I feel like coder is informal. So I will refer to myself as a coder occasionally around friends. I'll say that as a verb, but I will never represent myself as a coder.
So,
because what I do in the field is so much more than writing code.
if you were in a job interview for your first job, right, and you kept on using the term coder versus software engineer and building software, like, what do you think is the difference between those two people?
One's an art.
And what's the other?
It's
Maybe like a hobbyist sort of thing?
Not even just hobbyist. It's there's so much more that encompasses writing software than just writing code.
It's almost like it's demeaning to be called a coder.
I wouldn't necessarily say that. I just wouldn't.
What feeling do you get if someone was to say, "Yeah, Peter's a coder. He's a senior coder"?
Would you want to hit them?
No, it just feels it feels silly.
But like if I was introducing you to a whole bunch of other developers and they were software engineers, right? And we were in a group, and I said, "Yeah,
I mean,
Peter's our coder. He really knows what he's doing."
But they all understand.
But how would you feel if I said that?
I would be like, Nathan's an idiot.
You'd be humiliated, right? Like, this is embarrassing.
It's like a fine artist versus a guy that paints Bob Ross type stuff.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Or paint by numbers kind of thing.
Paint by number. Okay.
Paint by numbers versus somebody that creates unique shit.
Yeah, like I said, it's an art. And you spend a lot of time. It's not just about writing code.
So, well, this was a really interesting learning point, because I remember when we initially spoke about this, you got so mad because you saw one of our ads and it was coding. And it's funny because almost everybody coming into the industry is thinking coding. That's the mentality. That's the verbiage that's used. And then whenever we started speaking of software engineering, you said a couple things that was really unique. Dustin picked up on it too.
Shout out to Dustin.
Yeah, shout out to Dustin. You specifically said, dude, one is like people that typically are just playing around with shit and don't really know what they're talking about. One is somebody who can actively be impacting millions of people's lives. Like, you're creating important shit.
That's kind of the cool thing about software is you really, the sphere of influence you have is really global. And that's really where I feel like software or being involved in software is powerful. It's like one of the few professions that no matter how big or small you are, you can influence change around the world. Whether you care whether the earth is flat or not, you can have your opinion be known, and you can find it. You can just find a community around it.
Yeah. So
and another thing is it also transcends language boundaries. And
That's true.
that's a good point.
because you all have this common understanding. You all have learned this language, and whether or not you speak whatever, I can read code and I can have an idea of what you're trying to express.
A lot of people that are watching this are students that are kind of coming along in their software engineering journey. not using the C word here. What's an example? Because you said you do a lot of stuff other than write code. What are like some examples of that?
So if you look at what goes into building software, is how do I want people to interface with this?
Mm-hmm.
That's a big part of it. How do I want somebody to interact with this program I'm writing? What makes sense to them as an output? What am I trying to convey to them? It's so much more than somebody clicks a button and like something happens, or I give it a number and it gives me another number.
Almost like the feeling.
Yeah, the feel, the design of it, and then how I architect that program is very much so like, what are the needs? So if there's going to be a lot of traffic to it, how would I write that code, or how would I structure my infrastructure along with my code to be able to handle that type of volume? It's not just about writing the code. There's a lot of thinking and planning and designing. So writing code is usually the easy part.
It's interesting because we talk about it all the time. We have so many students that will come in and they just fall all the time. They run code, they write code that just falls apart all the time. They work on software that just doesn't work all the time. And it's frequent for us to see people who just feel defeated, right? Can you talk a little bit about the development journey for yourself? And just if you were to look back to yourself when you were first starting and think about just how hard it was going to be and speak to that.
Yeah, it's really difficult. It takes a long time, and it feels like it took days to accomplish almost nothing that you thought would be easy. It's really about perseverance and really embracing that this is something that you're going to do. It's not just like any skill. Like, this takes time to develop, and it's been a long time for me. But I still run into, when I'm looking into something new. For example, a couple of years ago, there were courses on Coursera around like supervised and unsupervised learning. I felt like an idiot for months. It's just how it works. I felt like it took me forever to get anywhere, and each of those wins were so hard fought. And really, that's what it's like for a while until you build that base of understanding. It just takes a while.
It seems like the path is, like when we're first getting started, everybody wants to go to Python, then they want to go learn C++, then C#, and then they want to learn JavaScript. And it seems like one of the paths to having success as a developer is pick one path to get started in, understand the fundamentals of programming, and then after you get that footpath in and you start building actual software, you could then exploring other options. For example, you love to code in Rust, a fucking arbitrary language that...
It's actually very popular.
Okay, not according to Stack Overflow in the 2021 survey. Only like 8% of people used it.
Oh yeah, but it's got the highest developer satisfaction. It's a wonderful language.
The conversation was how many people use it. 8%. Okay.
Oh yeah, whatever.
Okay. No. Okay. Whatever.
8% is actually pretty high if you think of the number of developers.
You know what JavaScript is?
Oh, it's number one. Yeah, it's a lot.
Number one, baby.
Number one, baby. So the interesting question I have for you: you have a lot of people who jump in the beginning. They want to jump around a lot. It seems like one of the fastest path and kind of what we preach as of right now is get a job as a React developer, essentially. Get your foot started. And then after you've gotten your foot in the door, you can play around with other ideas just for fun.
Absolutely. A lot of the principles remain the same through a lot of languages. There are exceptions. There are funny languages out there. But you learn the principles of writing software. And then really that's relative. For most cases, that's pretty transferable to different languages. And those languages a lot of the big ones are all slightly different in their own ways, and they have their own strengths. But JavaScript is a great language for, learning to program. It's great because you can see instant results. It helps keep you motivated.
It seems like the strengths from like one language to another. One might be easier to write, but has a lower or a slower load speed, or it runs a little bit slower.
Yeah, Google, Mozilla, all of them have put so much work into like the JavaScript engines that really you're not too hindered there unless you're doing something really specific.
You said JavaScript engines. Give us a little bit of context.
So Google's one's the V8. I don't remember what Mozilla's is called. I think Safari had SpiderMonkey for a while.
Is that something that read JavaScript and allowed it to load faster, essentially?
Yeah, essentially it's the engine that runs it. So how fast can this execute the code? Like, how does that translate onto your machine so that it can do things?
So it's almost like JavaScript is like the fuel we're putting in, but they made better engines to burn it better, essentially?
Yeah, sure. You could see it like that.
So even though JavaScript in the past may have been a lot clunkier, they've made it to where the engine can take it in a lot easier.
I mean, JavaScript was incredibly clunky in the early days. The newer developers are really lucky, especially with stuff like React, which works on the virtual DOM. Before, really rendering stuff on web pages was different on every browser.
Really? So from Mozilla Firefox to
all of them are
Safari
different.
to...
And you kind of just had to know those idiosyncrasies between each of the browsers and like,
Interesting.
know how that was going to work. And that wasn't really just necessarily JavaScript. That was like a lot of CSS stuff and how it would load. And it was... Web development's come so far in the last 10 years.
I actually have a thing about that. You said you started 15 years ago? Around?
I think professionally, I started when I was 21, 22.
What's the difference in the learning process back then compared to now?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, it was huge. So when I started programming, I was probably around 12. And we didn't have the same docs that were available. Everything was on SourceForge. A lot of the times, if you wanted to use libraries, you had to read the source code.
It was exclusively reading. That was the only
Yeah,
option.
there was no courses really.
We're talking about physical books, right?
No, it was still online.
Oh, okay.
So I started programming when the internet was around, which
It was like,
lucky for me.
imagine if you having to use like Photoshop, and the only way to learn about it is if you went to Photoshop's documentation, like Photoshop.com,
Oh,
and
like
looked through their fucking
the
documentation.
provided thing
Oh,
that
yes.
they had.
or like look at the source code. Like
Fucking suck.
how did they build this?
It would
So
be
you'd be
terrible.
reading code like the
Wow.
person wrote, and you'd be like, oh, how did they write this?
So all these like kind of like group, did any of the group stuff exist where people were kind of like trying to help each other? Was that in its infancy?
So IRC was a thing, and Freenode had a couple channels, but the community was a lot smaller. It was a lot more of the, if you haven't invested the effort, I'm just not going to help you, and that's still around.
Yeah.
But it was a much more difficult learning environment.
You were doing this in an entirely different country also.
Yeah.
Did you find anyone in your area that was
In
like...
Botswana, no.
Yeah.
It wasn't really a big programming community in Botswana. When I went to university, there was some IRC channels, and there were kind of meetups. Not what you really see now, but the community was tiny, or comparatively.
So I think part of the journey, there's a hilarious joke you told me. I think you were joking around when you told me it. But you're like, back in like the early 2000s, when companies were finding people to learn how to code, they essentially found individuals that were autistic, and it was like throwing them a Rubik's Cube and said, solve this problem.
Might have to cut that out.
I wouldn't say I said that. I would more say I don't really know of a correct analogy. It was a lot harder.
Because I think what matters about this is what it was to what it became. It seems like the gap has gotten so much more blue collar in a sense in terms of who can possibly do it.
Oh yeah, programming is so accessible right now, and it's really cool seeing the evolution from when Coursera started to where we are now.
Yeah.
Where computer science was one of the first fields that was really available to the general public for free. We've traditionally never really cared if you in the more modern era, which is only what I can speak to. We don't really care whether you have a degree. It's more about, can you do this?
And the people that were kind of the pioneers of it, right? And I think it's fair to say the individuals at the top of the game are individuals who are very kind of high level and obsessive over shit.
Oh yeah, I mean, with anything, you have to have passion and you have to want it, and you have to put in a lot of work. And the cool thing is, almost everywhere I've worked, there's been a continual push for growth.
Yeah.
So you'll find that good software engineers like other good software engineers because they will push each other to grow. And there's not really much of an ego in that sense, that if there's a pull request out there, I'm free to give any feedback I want as long as it's in the interest of making things better. And it's very rare that experienced software engineers get their feelings hurt by that.
it's so cool because we see this in our students, right? They hop in the student lounge, they'll all get together.
Mm-hmm.
It was weird when we first started seeing that because like, dude, are the people like just talking in the student lounge together? Like,
It's great.
It was really odd. Like,
I think it's really helped our community.
100%, right? Like we have people actually talking together, getting together. Like it's just really neat. I want to come back to one thing you said. So you talked about the importance of understanding the principles of coding and things like that, right? So if you understand JavaScript, typically principles are going to be the same, right? Because it's more like software principles. So the principles we're thinking about are like dry, don't repeat yourself.
Or not even that, just basic programming principles. Do you understand what applicatives to use with this type of loop? How would you use them? What are good patterns for solving this type of problem?
Let's get this down to like a very basic level, right? Someone's kind of building their first bit of software.
Can you write a for loop in JavaScript? Well, then you can probably write a for loop in Rust, and then you can probably write a for loop in Python. So really, it's transferable. Those concepts are very transferable. So if you have good fundamentals of programming in JavaScript, it's very likely that unless you go to like a Lisp or a very interesting language, that you're really going to trip over that stuff again.
Well, we're speaking about principles. It seems like the ability to use functions efficiently and effectively. So with minimal code as possible.
Generally, yes. There is diminishing returns on that.
Really?
Oh, of course. So
you got to start removing functionality or like
no, not even functionality. So you can have something which is difficult to read, which is the same. And a good example is naming variables correctly. Or so when people, so for example, minimized code is something that people do a lot with JavaScript because load time is big in the web world. So what they'll do is they'll get things that are minimizers that will cut out all the cruft. Like, so they don't care if your variable is well named, it's now a one-word variable. They take out all the white space. It's just very, very dense block of code, almost unreadable. But it does the same thing.
But it seems like the problem with that comes down to when you have new developers come in. So when I was listening to a book called The Hard Things About Hard Things, he was talking about how they needed software to grow exponentially. They brought in like 20 million in funding. And he said they went and hired like fucking 100 developers, something like that. And their current staff, that was like 8 people.
Wow.
They hired all these people fast.
Sounds like chaos.
And they literally sat there and they're like, dude, we fucked everything up. They're like, we have to, like, the ability to train people on this code base is just non-existent. They don't understand anything that's happening right now. So these people are useless, essentially. Right? So like when you write code like that and you have people who are coming in who have no ability to read the code.
So part of the art is what I like to call self-documenting software, and like there's principles like dry and a lot of principles you have that help make code more readable. Something that took me longer than I'd like to admit. I was probably around 19 when I learned this. It's not about feeling smart when you write code. The true art is writing code that anybody could come along and be like, oh, I could write that. No, taking a very complicated concept and reducing it to something that is seemingly very simple. That's the art of software.
I feel like there's like a lot of analogies around that, right? Like breaking something down. What do they teach in writing? Like a 5th grader should be able to read this and understand it?
Depends.
So Richard Feynman was actually very interesting. Very famous physicist, I think, at MIT. But he has contributions, computer science, like astrophysics, like everything. If you ever watch his lectures, he explains incredibly complicated concepts to the point in such a manner that I feel like I could understand them and grasp them. And that's really the same thing in software. Can you take these complicated ideas and distill them down into a manner in which another software engineer who's maybe less experienced or somebody just coming into the project can read and understand it?
How long did it take you until you felt like I can do that? Like I can simplify my stuff to where it's almost like music, like anybody could read this?
I mean, it depends on how difficult that concept is for me. So if I were to try write AI stuff, probably not as much. I think I don't have that type of vocabulary yet. But it's something you practice, and in my mind, it's the goal and part of the art of it.
Do you think, as someone that does a lot of mock interviews and stuff, that's one thing maybe people do too often is overcomplicate their stuff?
In mock interviews?
Or just in general, like, what do you think are some of the things people miss out on in those sorts of scenarios?
Sorry, I don't quite understand.
like if someone's interviewing for a job in software engineering, whatever you want to call it, like what are some of the common pitfalls you see where people fail?
I find people will talk about experience they don't necessarily have, and then struggle when they're pressed on that. So that's something I see very often. They'll talk about something they did or something designed or something they've done, I suppose, or were a part of, and then when pressed on that, they don't have a good understanding of how that worked. And to me, that's a very common thing I'll see in interviews. You see the same thing. Interviews are funny. It's really just a game that you can practice for and get good at.
So it seems like the ability to have success in an interview is really dependent on your ability to articulate your code.
Of course.
So I think what Bruce was actually trying to say a second ago, let's say we go through a portfolio project of one of mine, right? You're going through we did this with a handful of students, especially a long time ago at Devslopes, and they had stuff on GitHub, and we were going through looking at the notations they had the last time they submitted a pull request, and it's like, dude, this is horrible. You should not show this to employers, right? This is outdated by 2 years. You have literal explicit words in this code. Like, these are the things that is actively happening.
So I don't hate the explicitness in it sometimes. But really, if you're showing me a project for a portfolio, I want it to be
professional.
I want it to look good. Yeah, I want documentation. I want well named variables. I want it to be structured well. I don't want it to be like a mess, looking like just like one of your hobby projects. And it's fine if you have a bunch of hobby projects mixed in there because it shows me that you care about it. But if you're saying, hey, this is an example of the work I could do for you, I want it to be polished.
So if someone's showing, like, they're just open, let's say they just have an open GitHub, right? Like, if it's any, like, kind of one-off projects, kind of joking around, stuff like that, just make it private, most likely.
Yeah, or, like, sometimes it's fun to see where people came from. So I'll see like early projects where they started messing around with something or started learning programming, and it's fun to see that progression, but I have to see that progression get somewhere.
There's something to always be said though, right? It's kind of like in the court of law. Like, if something is not relevant, do not bring it up. I remember the famous scene in Johnny Depp's scenario. There was something that they couldn't bring up, and they had to hope to God Amber's attorney brought it up, and they brought it up, and Johnny Depp was literally like, yes. So the point I'm getting at is, even though it might be great that you see that they're from their beginning, I feel like to an extent to like, guys, go ahead and hide everything unless it's a super professional deal, because I feel like it might bring out things, whether they make a political joke or they do something really odd.
Anything like that, I would hide. But I still want to, what I do want to see when I'm looking at portfolios, especially from somebody who's new, is, do you care about this? Are you messing around and like forking things and trying to build things?
Interesting.
So to me, that's important.
Forking things.
So looking at other projects, being like, oh, cool, I'm going to try contribute to this.
That's what I was just about to say. So should they be actively going out, finding really cool GitHub projects, or just projects as a whole, and trying to contribute to that? Because open
absolutely.
repositories, right?
Absolutely. So if there's open source projects you care about, or that are just open to beginner contributors, like that's a great way for me to see that you are interested in doing this and you care. It's something you're somewhat passionate about.
So let's give a little bit of context. So yesterday I made a really cool video with West actually on what to do if you're applying to jobs you have no experience. I gave a baseline answer of, like, if you haven't gotten a Module 5 in Devslopes, like, you're not getting a job. Like, let's be realistic. You got to complete all the way through there to have, like, good portfolio experience. And then after that, you can go get some freelance projects. Now, being able to have freelance projects, but also showing that you've tried to fork and work with open repositories, that seems really awesome. Now,
it does.
I want to give some context. Bruce may not know this. So when we're talking about GitHub and open repositories and open source projects, can you break those down for those of us that just don't understand it perfectly?
So the web and I guess the software world is built on open source projects, and it does.
Meaning anybody can contribute to it.
Anyone can contribute to it. Anyone can read the source code, and it's generally free under most use cases, depending on the licensing.
Okay.
So the idea that you were to contribute to that is...
And everybody has to accept the code too.
Yeah, well, not everybody, but there are generally maintainers that will look through the code you've written who have a good understanding of the entire project. So they know whether that change is good or bad or how to do that. And it's a great way to get good mentorship from people, because you can they want high quality code in their project. So if you submit something, generally they're pretty grateful. A lot of the issues you're going to be seeing as a junior are stuff they could have done, but they're trying to invite people into their community so that hopefully those people stick around and they don't have to do all the work on the projects.
It's super cool because this is what it almost seems like, right? So jiu-jitsu. You go to a new jiu-jitsu gym, literally everybody in this room does jiu-jitsu, including Peter. Peter, last time we trained together, somehow was able to beat me, okay? And he's using this fake back injury just so he doesn't train with me ever again.
It's true.
Just so he can
I'm
have
never
that.
going to roll with him again.
So when you go to a new jiu-jitsu gym, typically if you're brand new, not a lot of people are going to want to train with you. They'll kind of stay away from you, right? Mm-hmm. You kind of have to work your ass off to become accepted in the gym. But after you get accepted, all kinds of things open up for you. People want to be friends with you. They invite you to special training sessions. Like, you become part of a real community. Mm-hmm. It seems like one of the cool parts of trying to contribute to these open source projects is that when you're trying to fork things in, when you're trying to contribute, it shows that, hey, this guy's trying to get part of the community. Yeah. It might be hard to get in, right? But once you get in and you show that you've had stuff accepted in the repository, especially as somebody who's new, it seems like that could be a big deal, or even just trying to push in.
Oh, yeah, it's huge. Software is built off of the mentality that if it doesn't exist or you want it, like, go make it happen, because you have the ability to do that.
Yeah.
It's not like if you're a civil engineer, like, I really wish there was a bridge here. you can't go build that bridge.
Yeah.
Software is different. If there's something you want or something you want changed, you can make your own version of that software. You could fork it if it's open source and make your own version, and you can use that version and invite other people to use that version. And whatever you want it to be, you can make it that.
I think that's what made me so passionate about it, right? So I'm somebody that I didn't go out and build tons of software. I built a ton of WordPress websites. I understand the coding world. The closest thing I've done to like hardcore coding is everything we did in Excel. It made me feel so good whenever you sat there and you're like, Nathan, you're essentially a coder for what you've had to build here. And I was like, dude, I'll take that as an accomplishment. I'll take that. And so it's funny though, the power of it seems really interesting, because you could be somebody in buttfuck Egypt, middle of nowhere, right? And you could be contributing to something that impacts millions of people's lives.
Absolutely.
And that seems so cool. So when you're starting off, you're brand new. You're going through, you're working on your own projects, but you're finding maybe some open source stuff that you find really interesting. You know what, man? I'm going to try to fork. I'm going to try to contribute to this. I'm going to try to do anything I can.
Make your own version of it.
Yeah. And so if you can't contribute to it, try to make your own version of it. Mm-hmm. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's a awesome world. It's... the whole internet runs off of open source software. It's actually crazy.
And so it seems like it's those, like, what coding is not necessarily the income.
Nope.
It's not. It's about joining a group of people who want to change the world. That's what you want to do as a coder.
You could say that, yeah. Like, or just have the ability to. That's the cool part of it. You could be as creative as you want, and you have an outlet for that. You can impact millions of people's lives. And although indirectly they're not necessarily going to know that it was you, but
yeah,
like, you have the ability to influence change, and that's cool.
What was the book that I was reading by Dr. Bob or Uncle Bob?
Clean Code.
Clean Code. So in Clean Code, he was talking about something really hilarious. He said, when you click the brake on your car, okay, do you think that there's some kind of pole that immediately goes to your brakes? He said, no. It's code that tells the brakes how much pressure to apply. And he said, you may not think you trust code or you don't want to trust computers or whatever it is, but he was like, every single time you click those brakes, you're trusting some young 20-year-old coder to keep you alive and stop you from killing Becky from down the street who's 79.
Poor Becky.
He's like, that's what you're trusting with code. Your entire life revolves around it. If code didn't exist, everything would stop functioning the moment we made it.
Yeah, it's everywhere. In your cars, in your toaster, in... literally everything.
So it's funny, like it's really wild to get context of. So I feel like in the beginning journey, it can be so easy to get discouraged because it's just so fucking hard. But it seems like if we could just stick in there, right? Join the community, do everything we can to contribute, even if we feel like we're not good. The interest in it is really what matters most.
Yeah, that feeling of not being good doesn't go away. At least for me.
Imposter syndrome.
Yeah. It doesn't really go away, for at least for a very long time. I don't know.
Is it like every single time you get something, you seek a new objective where you feel that imposter syndrome.
I mean, the further you get, the more you realize you don't know.
So I want to ask this in a different way. So we talked the other day about imposter syndrome is a feature of greatness, essentially, right?
I don't think that was with me.
No, so me and Bruce were talking about
Okay.
it.
You were there.
We were talking about how it's a feature of greatness, right? It's a feature of what happens when you want to do great things. So what I meant by that was, if we don't feel imposter syndrome, we aren't growing. So
Sure,
an example
I
of
can
this is, if you didn't feel imposter syndrome and you were a front-end developer, it's because you weren't challenging, like you got happy and complacent with where you are.
Mm-hmm.
Essentially, if you want to become a better developer, you're going to be having to learn new things, which is going to show you how much you do not know.
Yep. And the cool thing about this industry is you're always going to be learning new things.
Beautiful. So it seems like the process, not just for coding, but for life. If you feel like you have everything figured out, you are not growing.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So for the students that are in the program that are like, dude, I feel like I'm an idiot. I feel like this is stupid. I feel like I'm not smart enough. How am I supposed to do this? We have a handful of students that feel it 24/7. My thought process is that's amazing. If you feel imposter syndrome, you're on the right track. You're doing the right things because you're growing.
It also means you care enough.
Interesting.
Because if you don't care about it, why do you care if you're an imposter?
Fuck it. Doesn't matter.
You have to want to be the thing that you're the imposter of, right?
I love that. It's so funny because one of the things we talked about a couple episodes was, and I have a really interesting question for you. So for me, a lot of things that happened to me throughout my life, I had a lot of energy. I'll say like traumatic anxiety, essentially, right? Like, so we talked this morning. You said, I'm one of the few people you've ever known that has been able to survive and somehow maintain energy with external motivations, right? So I like nice watches. I plan on getting a Rolls Royce in 3 years. I think we talked about that already. The nice house, like all those things. And I've understood. I have the quote that I got from Billions. I'm a carnivorous fucking monster. He literally says that in the movie. Like, so they're sitting there and they're at a charity event. And they're sitting there and they're like, it's these two guys talking to these two billionaires. And he's like, Bobby, when do you think enough is enough? He was like, it seems like there's never going to be enough for you. And he sat there and he's like, man, you and I are no different. Mm-hmm. See, the thing is, you want to sit here and pretend that you're some amazing person. We both know for damn well you come here just so you can make yourself feel good for a day or two. But I'm just comfortable with the fact that I know I'm a carnivorous fucking monster. You are one too. You're just not willing to admit it. And guess what? Anybody in this room is as well. There's no way all of us would have been here and achieved as much success as we did if we didn't have it. Mm-hmm. Right? And so with myself, some stuff that happened to me as a child, I had a lot of energy that I didn't know where to put it, right? Where it went into when I was younger was initially sports, and then I put all of it in my career. I didn't really put it in relationships because I couldn't feel like I had a way to express it. So all of my insecurities, everything came into my career and trying to do better so I feel like I could prove people wrong and I could somehow love myself because of that. That's how I motivate myself. And I know a lot of students in the program find their motivations by putting a lot of the nasty stuff that's happened to them into their career to try to better themselves. For you, why have you continued on the path to coding? You could have stopped a long time ago. Money wasn't an issue. You could have stopped at a job where you got paid $125,000. You came from coding.
Yeah.
Or you also came from South Africa or Botswana, where you didn't you could have stayed there, made $75,000 a year, and had a fucking dream life.
Yes, I could have. That would have been great. Although South Africa's kind of catching up, but I don't know. My motivation is not necessarily from external sources. It's from, this is something I'm passionate about and something I care about. I like coding. I want to be good at it. Same way you want to be good at jiu-jitsu. Maybe motivations are different, but
just a little.
But I want to be good at the things I like.
Why?
So I think it's fun.
You want to be good at things you like because you think it's fun.
Yeah, I don't think it's that deep. Why would I, if I enjoyed something, why would I want to be bad at it?
So it's funny because I feel like I've noticed this from a lot of like the coding community. It's funny because it hit me whenever I heard the name of Python. I thought it was gonna be cool related to a fucking Python. They're like, no, it's Monty Python. It seems like the entire fucking culture of coding is this borderline troll culture.
It's changed a lot. It used to be a lot more jokey, a lot more tongue in cheek. But as things get bigger and more popular, that kind of falls away.
So, but it seems like a lot of the good developers kind of come from that. Like,
Well, that's just a product because we're older, right?
what do you mean?
It takes years to get good at something. So, like the generation of really solid software engineers now are the older people. The new ones are coming in. They're going to have their own memes and their own kind of culture as they get better and they become the leaders of the industry.
So, if you have somebody who's coming in that's kind of new in a sense, right, a little bit different from y'all's environment, do you have any?
The difference is I struggle. So I'm from the generation I had to read source code when I was learning to program. So I sometimes find myself lacking sympathy.
Essentially, how-to manuals.
Yeah, read the fucking manual.
That sounds terrible.
So sometimes I have trouble sympathizing with people who are finding something difficult, but they haven't necessarily tried. So when they're looking for the answer, they're looking for me to give them the answer. I struggle to do that because I don't feel like you're going to retain that information if I just give it to you.
Peter, do you know who you are?
Who?
You know who you are?
No.
Bruce, I think you're going to sympathize with this a little bit. You were the old man that told people I had to walk uphill both ways to get to school and back in the snow.
Yes, I am.
There was 6 feet of snow.
Oh, with you, it was like getting chased by mountain lions.
We just have regular lions.
We just have regular lions and baboons.
Yeah, we just have regular lions.
So not only was your normal life substantially harder, on top of that, you had to read fucking how-to guides on coding. That sounds atrocious.
Oh, well, I mean, we didn't have like the same tutorial culture you guys have.
I'm gonna look at the camera to give context on sometimes how unsympathetic Peter can be. So we had somebody forever ago ask a question. He asked what kind of computer would work for writing code, I think. And Peter's tongue-in-cheek response, which made me cry, was he went and made a GIF of him going to Google and typing in what type of computer works for XYZ and clicked enter. And he was like, here's how you can find the answer. And just dropped the GIF in there. And it was the funniest shit I have seen in my entire life. It made me cry. I said, Peter, number one, that is unacceptable. Like, you cannot do that. But it's so funny, right? Like, I think, why is it? Like, was it just because that's how we were able to come up?
Part of programming is learning to solve your problems. Like, use your brain. That's part of this industry. Use your brain. Learn to solve problems. Learn to figure things out.
But we have people who join Devslopes, spend thousands of dollars, and then turn around and say, I shouldn't have to ask questions when I get stuck.
I mean, it's fine to ask questions. I will, and what we will do is we'll give you answers, but we won't give you the answer. Because it's impossible for us to teach you everything that you will need to know in the industry. Our goal is to get you to a level where you can join a team and you can continue your journey of programming. You're going to be learning for the rest of your career, and you need to learn how to learn. You need to learn to figure these things out. Me giving you the answer to everything is not helpful, because when you do get into a job, if you got all the answers, you passed all our assignments, and then you got a job, and then all you did for the rest of your career is ask people how to solve your problem,
but Peter, I don't know what to do right now. I'm stuck.
Then ask a question that shows that you've tried to think about it and you've tried to seek resources, and we will point you in the right direction.
Interesting. So what you're saying is it's this process of learning how to learn. Initially, you're going to fail flat.
Of course.
It's going to be fucking miserable.
Yeah, it sucks. It takes you a long time to do anything.
But Peter, it feels like I haven't made any progress in weeks. I've been stuck on the same thing for months, and I don't know what to do.
And so we will point you in the right direction, and when you figure that out, you're going to remember that lesson.
So I have to spend months on something to learn one lesson.
I mean, yeah, sometimes. Depends on the lesson. I've literally spent, even as a senior year engineer, like weeks, like trying to solve certain problems. But I know how to do that now. I've learned that pattern.
So we used to talk about this. So when I ran my empowerment calls, it was Monday, Wednesday, Fridays, right? Accountability calls at the time. And we would have people who would show up Monday, Wednesday, Friday, up until the next Friday. Be like, I'm making no progress. I feel like I'm stuck.
They're not making no progress, though.
What are they making?
They are making progress. They just haven't solved the problem yet. But they're identifying what is not working.
Is that big of a deal?
Of course it is.
But I'm not finding the right answer.
You will find the right answer because eventually you're going to eliminate all the wrong answers.
Interesting. So is that like the process of coding?
Sometimes. Not always. Sometimes.
When you're beginning.
So when you're beginning, you need to understand how things work and whether. So I remember a while ago I was struggling because I was learning Rust, and something was returning something called an iterator, and I thought I could do something with that iterator, and it was just I was like, oh, you can collect on that, and that didn't solve my problem, but it solved part of my problem.
So it seems like as we're beginning. It's funny because I think I have something I can bring up with you about this. Mm-hmm. The way we learn is a lot of the process of learning in the beginning of any skill or any new thing is what not to do.
Yeah, and sometimes you'll learn pieces of the puzzle that are not for that problem.
For sure.
But you've learned something. You haven't not learned anything.
How many times in jiu-jitsu have we learned like, oh, I need to never step back like that, or no, I need to never leave my arm like that, or they could snap it off.
Yep.
Good thing to know. I'm not doing that again. Huh? When you first started and you were creating the actual ads, I was pretty hands off, I would say. Was I pretty?
Mostly.
And then I was like, dude, just figure it out. Like, if something doesn't work, we'll create another one. That's essentially the entire process, wasn't it?
We had a great time playing around with a lot of different gear we didn't need, and
we literally bought. How much was that stand we bought downstairs?
That's
like $500.
It was a very expensive stand.
It was a stand that held a boom mic, and he put it out in the garage. I was like, "Is that not?" I was like, "What is that deal for?" He's like, "A boom mic." I was like, "What the fuck did we buy that for in the first place?"
Well, at the time, but that's exactly the point, especially with something like production. The more mistakes I made, the easier it became to not make said mistakes. And now look at us, we got a 4-mic podcast set up.
So that's what that's actually kind of beautiful. So tomorrow we're gonna have Ethan on the podcast to talk a little bit more detail.
Him downstairs.
Yeah, now he's downstairs. Okay, so it's funny because this is essentially the process of building principles on what not to do and what should you do.
There's a reason why, if you touch the stove,
don't touch that shit again.
Yeah, your mother goes, see, you fucking moron. Look what happened to you. And, that's such a valuable life lesson in a lot of ways. You learn through negative reinforcement. You learn arguably more through negative reinforcement than you do positive. Like if something doesn't work, then I get to the point where I'm like, okay, well, why? Why doesn't it work? And now I stumble upon like 4 different new things or techniques or whatever, that I never even thought of before.
There's something here. Mm-hmm. When we talk about this process, you use the word stumbled, right? Think about when we made, was it penicillin? We found that by pure fucking accident.
Or it grows on oranges or...
Yeah, and we found that by pure accident, didn't we? Okay, so I want to transition this then, right? So you talked about how you have worked on you at once, vaguely at least, worked on a neural network.
Yeah.
Okay, so is this not the process to an extent, right? The way that I'm being very general here, but whether it's machine learning or if it's neural networks, to an extent, it's evolution in the sense that sometimes we don't understand how neural networks work. But if we look at how evolution worked throughout history, it was something pure random that was a gene mutation that happened to help it survive in that environment that said, okay, that person was able to survive with slightly longer arms. Let them continue having children or reproducing. Mm-hmm. And then the arms got longer and longer and longer over time. So abnormally long arms gave them the ability to survive in the forest. Those with short arms ended up dying, right? So if we look at essentially, if we want to summarize how neural networks or machine learning essentially works, with positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement is essentially just removing it. Correct me if I'm wrong, right?
I don't actually know the role of that in machine learning.
So if we were to just play it off the basics, though, because if we were to expect how these things work, most of the time it's recreating nature within a machine.
Yeah, somewhat. Yeah, in some of them.
So negative reinforcement is either getting hurt or being removed completely, eliminated.
Yeah, so if you look at how they've kind of evolved those neural networks, or at least the ones with that are playing games, they'll remove the ones that are not doing as well.
So yesterday we were talking about ChatGPT, and we are talking about how it just spits out outcomes. Those outcomes are not necessarily tied to positive or negative, right? They're not scored as of right now.
In the neural net, everything is scored, and that's how it determines the response it's going to put out. Whether that response is correct or not is something that ChatGPT is not something that will return the correct answer.
Exactly.
It's something that recognizes patterns and outputs text based on those patterns.
So where things will get really interesting, it seems like, for example, I'm going to relate this to advertising. So there's no direct answer per se. Like there's not, so it spits out what it believes is the correct answer. That's the right thing. What it believes is the right answer. But if it's pure AI with no reinforced learning, correct?
Even if it's reinforced, each response or whatever is given a score inside of the neural net. And then that's the one with the highest score is the one that it returns.
But that's its internal score, right?
In some ways, you could probably see that.
So
with classifiers, I know when I did a little bit of work on classifiers.
And classifiers is essentially positive.
So essentially, like, is this a flower or not?
Got it.
It would say based from 0 to 1, which is a percentage, how likely is this to be a flower?
Okay. And it would give a response. So
it would say this is this likely to be a flower. It's also, if you have a multi-label or classified multi-things, it would be like, this is likely to be a flower, but also this likely to be a dog, and this likely to be a cat.
So I'm trying to view this to a lot of the jobs that people feel like are at risk. So for example, I don't know the validity of this. Someone said that ChatGPT was going to replace all web developers, right? Because you could just ask it, create a website where XYZ is done.
Yeah, I don't think it works like that. But I don't know if any of you guys have played around with it, but the code it produces sometimes doesn't work.
It doesn't work.
Yeah. It just spits out text based on patterns.
Can you imagine using this horse shit to write an essay in college and your teacher comes back like, what the fuck is this? It doesn't make any sense.
So like,
there's numbers through halfway of it.
Well, so it will generally make sense, but it might not be correct. It might say that, like, in your essay about ice cream, it might say that aliens are from Jupiter.
Well, that's the thing. Is like that's the thing that Grammarly, and this is why like a lot of English people don't trust Grammarly, is because context. Like, how can you teach AI to like construct context?
So it's getting better. One of the most annoying things about Siri, for example, is it doesn't have context. So you could ask it a question about the Empire State Building, and then be like, which city is it in? And it'll be like, what do you mean, which city is it? It doesn't understand the question.
Right.
So it's getting better.
So we're like 5 to 10 years out from some Terminator shit, basically. Like,
I don't think so. I don't know.
Are you of the belief that AI is going to essentially rule the world and kill all of us?
Rule the world, no. I think, is it going to impact our lives greatly at some time in the future? Yeah. Like within our lifetime.
When we heard about the scenario with Google creating the sentient whatever it was.
Oh, you mean the assistant that could make phone calls for you? And
so do you remember there's a developer that came from Google, said he created something that passed the Turing test, or it was sentient, and then they asked
sentient is a pretty big deal, I guess.
Do you remember that by chance?
No.
So I want to look this up. So
how many movies have we seen about this shit going left, and yet we just keep on pushing it?
What was that movie where that guy falls in love with the...
There's several. Ex Machina.
Yeah, that's the one. Ex Machina.
Yeah.
That was a good movie.
Okay, so we have something from Guardian.com. Are we going to trust that? There's also something from NPR.
Yeah, I don't know.
Both pretty reputable, I think.
So Google AI researcher who
God damn it.
who sees companies' AI as sentient thinks a chatbot has a soul. So
Has a soul?
has a soul.
I mean,
So-
that comes down to the question: do we have souls? I don't know.
Inside
Depends on your
Google,
religion.
engineer Blake Lemoine was tasked with the tricky question: figure out if the company's artificial intelligence showed prejudice and how it interacted with humans. So he posed questions to the company's AI chatbot, Law MDA, to see if answers revealed any bias against certain religions. This is where Lemoyne, who says he is also a Christian mystic priest,
Okay.
became intrigued. I had follow-up conversations with it just for my own personal edification. I wanted to see what it would say on certain religious beliefs, he told NPR. And then one day, it told me it had a soul. Lemoyne published a transcript of one of his communications with La MDA, which stands for Language Model and Dialogue Applications. His post is entitled, Is LMDA Sentient? Sentient. He posted it, yada, yada, yada. Who am I to tell God where souls can be put? He said. So all this stuff ends up happening. He gets fired from Google because of this for posting, to be fair, internal shit outside. You know, we're seeing some really interesting shit like this taking place.
It's exactly what we need is a computer that hates Jews. Imagine.
What do you think? Like, where does your...
Do I think they have a soul? No.
So...
I think it's a thing that recognizes patterns and outputs text.
Is that no different than what we are, though? We recognize pattern. We just have wet brains. Like, we have wet software.
Is the only thing stopping this from being?
I mean, but like it depends on whether you believe in a soul in the first place.
Well, I'm mainly speaking from the standpoint of like, we just happen to have millions of years of evolution, right?
I mean, you could argue so does an AI.
That's a great point.
That's scary.
But it's had to. I mean, that's neural networks essentially. It builds upon itself. We don't really know what's happening. We just know it's building upon itself.
In a sense.
And so that's the question I posed to you yesterday. It's kind of scary, right? So if we build a neural network that is able to produce strong outcomes, let's say in healthcare, right? A neural network that's able to cure diseases to some extent. I'm just going to be very vague here for a second. Let's say it's able to cure cancer, something like that, right? We put it inside the body and it's able to kill stuff. We just know it's able to do good for the human body. We don't necessarily know why it's able to do good for the human body. Is that not something kind of scary if we don't understand the process behind why it works, but it does work?
So I think when you're putting into physical, like real manifestations, so it's designing a drug, for example, it would have good reasons for combining chemicals together. As to why it's making decisions, my understanding is that you cannot see inside of a neural network and understand why it is making those decisions.
So I want to ask you the human question then, right? If I just started making massive decisions in the company, right, and that y'all didn't understand it but it seemed good, would you not be, or even better, your doctor just said, hey, you need to take this prescription. And you said, okay, is it going to do side effects? Yes, but it's going to do good for you. And you're like, what are the side effects? He's like, yeah, it doesn't really matter. Just take it.
Or get a new doctor.
Yeah, but so if they can't describe what's happening, it
doesn't work like that.
Okay.
So if you were to ask ChatGPT to do something and then explain it to you, pretty sure it could explain it to you.
I see. But you're relying on it.
But it's also it's a text transformer, right? So it recognizes patterns, but it's able to explain that. So you could give it a blob of code and tell it to explain that to you.
Got it.
Isn't the risk that these things will become so developed that they can make their own decisions and override the direction that they're given? Because that's how all these things start.
So
you know?
I don't know enough about that type of AI.
But that it's possible, right? Like if you can construct something to think on its own, because that's where we're going.
Is it thinking though?
Well, what is thinking? Like, is it not theorizing? Like
I don't
pulling
know.
from a bunch of different resources and kind of spitting something out?
I think it would make connections that we don't necessarily make. I don't know. Yeah, it's so far out of my depth. I don't know.
The future's fucked, bro. This is gonna turn into like some dystopia type stuff real soon.
And that's why I think things get really interesting, right? It's funny because we have these concerns. Like I have the concern of, man, do I want something making decisions for everybody that I don't understand?
Is it, Bill? You're the one making decisions, right?
Say it again.
You're the one making decisions.
So I'm.
currently it's not making any decisions.
Well, I'm saying that most likely when we look forward in the future, 10, 20, 30 years, it'll probably be at a point where it's going to be making a lot of decisions for us. So a good example of this is time.
We're at an hour and 10.
Cool. We'll keep going for a little bit. So the point that I'm getting at is it seems like there's probably going to be a bunch of really big generational changes that are going to need to take place to allow AI to get where it needs to for humanity.
I think you guys are looking at AI as just a general AI. There would be very specific. My understanding is there would be very specific AIs for different tasks. It's not like there's going to be some universal, all-knowing thing.
Doesn't it make sense for it to get to a point like that though? Like Hooli? I'm trying to be my inner Gavin Belson, bro.
What about self-driving cars? Like, what if your self-driving car? Like, we have no
100%.
idea what happens when those things malfunction,
Oh,
which they
yeah.
will.
They crash.
We know what happens.
Yeah, but it's like, what if that could have been prevented by human?
Oh, dude, I'm 100% pro. Stop letting humans drive, or make it to where if all cars could communicate together, problem
this is
solved.
This is a much better world.
You think so?
Just
Oh,
because
100%.
If you look at the error rate of a well-executed program, they're not distracted. They don't have other things going on in their lives. All they care about is taking from point A to point B. It's able to see in the dark. It has input sources that we with
can't.
our two eyes.
This is out of my wheelhouse.
Well, dude, it'll be so cool, right? Because when you have an entire network, a fleet of cars that are able to communicate to each other, quite frankly, we don't need to buy cars anymore. We say, hey, I'm leaving at XYZ.
Even before that, just a car that's completely dedicated to driving itself is going to do so much better than people who are driving and somewhat distracted, or even if you're not distracted. They can see all around your car. They can react way faster than we can.
How many years do you think we are from
decades.
you call an Uber and it's not even a person in that?
Oh, Uber? We're not far away from that. That's already happening. Uber already has self-driving AI.
So last I heard, I think they were doing it in Detroit, and they got kicked out of Detroit because they killed somebody.
Really?
Yeah, but this was
bro. They're so foolproof.
I'm not sure about that. I'm not exactly sure.
Oh, we're going conspiracy theory.
No.
Are there lizards driving them? Okay,
That'd be cool.
I'll look it up.
So,
if I called an Uber and there was just a dog in the front seat,
how many people kill other people right now?
I mean, in
lot.
totality, quite a few.
But my point is that if you look from what I understand to be the numbers, they're way less dangerous than we are.
Yeah, 100%. They're not going to be texting.
Even in the state right now.
I'm all for it. I think it's going to be substantially better.
And then we get into the whole, if you're in a car, but it can kill you, and save 5 other lives. What decision do you want your car to make? And
wait, say what?
Oh, it's like a.
Ethan asked me this yesterday when we were watching the movie. He's like, Nathan, would you want me to save you? Oh my fuck, guys! Would you want me to save you, or kill 100,000 people? And I said,
What the hell are you and Ethan?
You
talking
don't.
about?
Well, that's part of the movie we watched last night. We went to go see Knock at the Cabin. I was like, Ethan, I do not want to answer that question right now. Because I don't think you're going to like who I am as a person.
You haven't got the Rolls Royce yet.
It was a real... I thought a lot of people knew about this. It was a real question that was posed. If you're in a car and it can choose to save you versus a 3-year-old, or you versus 5 people, one of the barriers is, do you want a car that would choose to save somebody else over you? How does that work?
What the fuck? Can you imagine it comes up on your screen? No. Like 2 options, like a green and a red.
No,
selfish or solidarity. Which choice would you like to make, Bruce?
Yeah, you don't get to choose. It would just do it.
It would just do it?
It would just
do it. Shit, that's the hard part?
Well, that's one of the...
All right, guys, start building social capital.
So that means that they're
killed was walking outside of the crosswalk with a bicycle while the car was
even AI cars don't like cyclists. An AI car is...
shouldn't have been outside of the crosswalk.
So even cars hate cyclists. That's amazing.
The AI is like, fuck this.
And so that would be so funny. It's having wait. There's a solution to this, right? Don't they say the average human life is worth how much? I think they say it's worth like $75,000, some shit like that.
That's great.
It's cheap.
Oh my god, bro! So just get your net worth up. As long as you got like 5 homeless people are hopefully right there. As long as you got like $2,000 to your name, you're good.
So,
okay.
But isn't that the thing then, that like hypothetically these AI will be capable of making moral decisions on their own? Like that's like terrifying.
Though? It's not necessary.
Well, if the idea is like save myself or save everyone on this road, that's a moral decision.
Well, what if those people are Hitler?
But I would also
Straight up.
I would also say, as an outsider, I pick you die over, like, if I didn't know you, right?
100%, bro.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like you would want to make that decision because it's more likely that you wanted the people in the road.
But to your point, we're saying that anti-Semitic robots are possible.
So that's the funny part, right? That's when things get interesting, right? Like, that you start weighing, like, morality is really just utility at the end of the day, right? Like and dude, I forgot. Tech Lead had a really interesting post he made the other day. I think they were talking about a Logan Paul scenario with CoffeeZilla, and something happened. And CoffeeZilla was trying to roast Logan Paul for something. I forgot what it was. But he was like, this guy puts himself off as some moral hierarchy part. And he made, this was an abnormally like dark view of the world. But he sat there and he's like, there are no moral police. He's like, morality is simply just nonsense. He's like, you want to know why? Because you can go anywhere across the world and everybody has different views on morality. There is no universal view. So, and I was like, fuck, that's a great point. So I think we draw the lines when we start talking about morality. We're going to have Peter on more often. So whatever your code questions are, ask them, send us, drop them in the comment section, DM me directly if you're watching. This is one of our students off Discord. Thank you all so much for watching. Do you have any final points for them? Nope. Just
keep working at it. You'll get there one day.
One day.
Robots speaking German, bro.
That's a wrap. Thank you all so much for watching. We'll see you next episode.